I thought I had already survived the worst of it. The morning they called me into the district superintendent's office, I was standing in the hallway outside room 214, holding a stack of essays my 8th graders had turned in the night before. 31 papers. I remember thinking I'd grade them that weekend, maybe make a pot of coffee and sit by the window. I had no idea that by Friday afternoon I wouldn't have a classroom to go back to. My name is Willa Bennet. I'm 31 years old. I was a middle school science teacher at Hargrove Preparatory Academy in Naperville, Illinois, for 6 years. I say was because the school board terminated my contract 4 months ago in front of 12 people on the grounds of professional misconduct. And my father, who sat on that board, seconded the motion. I need you to understand something before I go any further. My father is not a villain from a movie. He's a man who coached my Little League team when I was 9, who drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring me cold medicine my first winter in college, who cried at my college graduation harder than my mother did. He is also a man who, when it mattered most, chose the institution over his own daughter. Those two things are both true, and I've spent 4 months trying to hold them at the same time without breaking. This is the story of what happened. All of it. I started at Hargrove in August of the year I turned 25, fresh out of my master's program at University of Illinois, certified in secondary science education, carrying enough student loan debt to make me nauseous if I thought about it too hard. Hargrove was a private prep school, kindergarten through 12th grade. The kind of place where the parents drove newer cars than the teachers, and the annual gala raised more money in one night than most public schools saw in a year. It wasn't where I'd imagined myself teaching, but the salary was livable, the science lab was state-of-the-art, and honestly, I just wanted to teach. For 5 years, I loved it. Not in a naive way, I knew what the school was. I saw the politics, I watched teachers come and go, but my kids were real. They were 13 and 14 and confused about everything, and once in a while one of them would get something, really get it. That cellular respiration wasn't just a diagram to memorize, but something happening inside their own body right now, and their face would change. That was enough. The trouble started with the curriculum review. In the spring of my 5th year, Hargrove announced it was updating its 7th and 8th grade science curriculum. New textbooks, new assessments, new alignment with what the administration called community standards. I sat in on the first committee meeting and noticed immediately that the proposed changes included removing 2 units I'd built from scratch, a unit on evolution and natural selection, and a unit on reproductive health and human biology. Both were being replaced with what the curriculum document called values integrated alternatives. I raised my hand and asked what that meant. The assistant principal, a man named Mr. Gaffney, who had never once visited my classroom in 5 years, smiled at me like I'd asked something slightly embarrassing. He said it meant the new materials would be more holistically appropriate for the school's families. I said, as professionally as I could manage, that evolution was not a values question. It was established science, and removing it from a college prep to curriculum was doing our students a direct academic disservice. Mr. Gaffney thanked me for my input. I went home that night and called my father. My father, I'll call him Dad the way I always have, even now, had joined the Hargrove Board of Trustees 3 years earlier. It wasn't unusual. He was a retired school principal himself, 35 years in public education in the Chicago suburbs, and when a neighbor suggested he'd be a good fit for the board, he'd said yes because he believed in the school's mission. He and I had talked about it when he joined. I'd been proud of him. I thought it meant we were, in some strange way, colleagues. That night, I explained what was happening with the curriculum. He listened. He said he'd look into it. He told me to keep doing good work and not borrow trouble before it arrived. I should have understood then that the conversation was already over. The next school year, the new curriculum rolled out. I taught it. I didn't agree with it, but I taught what I was given and found ways around the worst of it. Supplementing with outside readings, pointing students toward Khan Academy videos that covered what the textbooks no longer did, making sure my kids were not going to walk into a high school biology class completely blind. I was careful. I documented everything. I kept records of what I taught, what materials I used, what the official curriculum required, and then, in October, a parent complained. Her son was in my third period class. She said I had shown students a diagram, a scientific diagram from a peer-reviewed educational resource that she found inappropriate. She said I had undermined the school's values. She said her son had come home upset. I reviewed my lesson plan. I had shown a diagram of cell division, mitosis. That's it. I requested a meeting with the principal. She told me the complaint had been escalated to Mr. Gaffney. I requested a meeting with Mr. Gaffney. He said the situation was under review. 3 weeks passed. I heard nothing official, but I started noticing things. My name was left off a department email about the spring science fair. My classroom wasn't included in a facilities upgrade that renovated every other lab on my floor. Small things, the kind of thing you second-guess yourself about, wonder if you're being paranoid. In November, I got a letter. It informed me that the Board of Trustees would be conducting a formal review of my teaching practices at their December meeting. I had the right to attend and address the board. I called my father that night. He answered on the second ring. I told him what the letter said. I asked him what was happening. I asked him if he knew. There was a pause that lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then he said, "Willa, you've always had trouble picking your battles." I said, "Dad, they're accusing me of misconduct for teaching cell biology." He said, "I know this feels unfair." I said, "Is it going to be fair?" Another pause. Then, "I can't discuss board matters with you. You know that." I sat on my kitchen floor after I hung up, not crying, not yet, just sitting. My cat came and stepped on my leg like he does, and I put my hand on his back and I thought, this is actually happening. The board meeting was held in the school's main conference room on a Thursday evening in December. I wore my good blazer, the charcoal one I'd bought for my thesis defense. I brought a folder with 6 months of lesson plans, my curriculum compliance documentation, the original complaint versus what I had actually taught, and a 1-page statement I'd written and rewritten 11 times. There were 12 people in that room. The board chair, Mr. Hargrove III, whose grandfather had founded the school, Mr. Gaffney, the principal, 8 other trustees whose names I had memorized from the school website, and my father, seated at the far end of the table, who did not look at me when I walked in. The chair read the complaint summary. He described my pattern of circumventing the approved curriculum and my repeated disregard for the community's values. He did not mention that the specific lesson cited was a diagram of mitosis. I was given 5 minutes to respond. I stood up. I laid out my documentation. I explained, as clearly as I could, that every lesson I had taught was scientifically accurate, age-appropriate, and aligned with state academic standards. Standards which Hargrove, as a private school, had chosen to adopt in its own accreditation materials. I explained that the curriculum changes had removed content that students would need for the SAT, for AP Biology for college. I said that if the board voted to terminate my contract on the basis of this complaint, they would be setting a precedent that science teachers at the school could be disciplined for teaching science. I finished. I sat down. Then the chair said, "Does any board member have a statement?" My father cleared his throat. I looked at him. He was looking at his hands. He said, "I think it's important we take these concerns seriously. A pattern of behavior that disregards established community standards is not something we can overlook, regardless of," he paused, "other considerations." He never said my name. I don't know what I expected. I genuinely don't. But whatever I had held on to, some small part of me that thought he would not be able to do it when it was real and I was sitting right there, I felt it go. The vote was 9-3 in favor of termination. My father voted yes. I drove home in the dark with my folder on the passenger seat. I didn't call anyone that night. I sat in my apartment and made a list of everything I needed to do. File for unemployment, notify my student loan servicer, call my landlord about the lease, update my resume, practical things. I wasn't ready for anything that wasn't practical. What I didn't know, sitting in that apartment at 11:30 on a Thursday night, was that someone else was in that conference room who didn't think the vote should have happened. Her name was Dr. Annalise Farrow. She had been on the Hargrove board for 2 years. She held a doctorate in science education from Northwestern, had spent 15 years as a curriculum director in the Evanston school system, and had voted no. She had also, before she voted, requested that the board formally review my complete teaching record and been told the matter had already been sufficiently reviewed. She called me the following Monday. She said, "I want you to know that what happened was not unanimous, and it was not right." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I also want you to know that I've been making some calls. I think there's more going on here than one parent's complaint." I asked her what she meant. She said she found a pattern. 3 other teachers in the past 2 years had been pushed out of Hargrove under similar circumstances. All science or health teachers, all with strong performance records, all gone within months of raising concerns about the new curriculum. She'd also found something else. A vendor contract, signed 18 months ago between Hargrove and a company called Clarity Education Partners, a curriculum development company that provided, among other things, the values integrated materials that had replaced my units. Clarity Education Partners had a board of advisors listed on their website. One of the names was Gerald Hargrove 30, the same Gerald Hargrove who chaired the board that terminated my contract. Dr. Farrow said she wasn't sure yet what it meant, but it meant something, and she thought someone should know about it. I asked her why she was telling me. She said, "Because you're the one they actually hurt." I spent the next 6 weeks doing things I had never done before. I filed a complaint with the Illinois State Board of Education. I filed a complaint with the school's accrediting body, the Independent Schools Association of Central States. I talked to a labor attorney named Mr. Kurz Kavanaugh, who took my case on a contingency basis after I showed him my documentation and the Clarity contract information. He was the first person other than Dr. Farrow who said the words, "This is actionable," without any qualifier after them. I also called my father twice during those weeks. He didn't answer either time. My mother called me instead. She was careful, the way she gets when she's caught between people she loves. She said my father was under a lot of pressure. She said he hoped I understood he had obligations. She said she was sure things would work out. I told her I missed her and that I loved her and that I couldn't talk right now, and I hung up before my voice did something I didn't want it to do. The Accrediting Association agreed to conduct a formal inquiry. They scheduled a review hearing for March in Chicago. Before a 5-member panel, they requested documentation from both me and from Hargrove. They also, apparently, independently requested records of the vendor contract with Clarity Education Partners. Mr. Kavanaugh told me the night before the hearing, "You've done everything right. Whatever happens tomorrow, you did everything right." I said, "Will that be enough?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It should be." The hearing was held in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on South Michigan Avenue. The panel included 2 retired school administrators, a professor of education law, an independent curriculum specialist, and Dr. Constance Webb, who chaired the accreditation committee and had been in school administration for 27 years. Hargrove sent Mr. Gaffney and their legal counsel. My father was not in the room. I hadn't expected him to be, but I noticed his absence the way you notice a missing tooth, the space where something should be. The Hargrove counsel went first. They argued that my termination was a legitimate exercise of the board's contractual authority, that the school had documented concerns about my compliance with the approved curriculum, and that the Accrediting Association had no jurisdiction over personnel decisions. Then Mr. Kavanaugh presented our case. He walked the panel through 6 years of my performance reviews, all satisfactory or above. He walked them through the curriculum change timeline and the simultaneous emergence of the vendor relationship. He laid out the pattern Dr. Farrow had identified: 4 teachers with strong records, all pushed out within months of raising academic concerns, all in departments affected by the Clarity contract. Then he showed them the vendor contract itself. The Clarity Education Partners Agreement included a provision that Hargrove had not disclosed in its accreditation materials, a clause stating that the school's use of Clarity's curriculum was contingent on full integration across all applicable courses, and that any instructor found to be supplementing or contradicting Clarity materials could be classified as in breach of the school's professional standards. In other words, the contract had written the grounds for my termination before I ever raised my hand in that committee meeting. Dr. Webb leaned forward. She asked Hargrove's counsel when the board had been made aware of this clause. The counsel said they would need to consult their records. Dr. Webb said, "The contract is dated 14 months ago. I'm asking whether the board understood at the time of signing that this clause could be used to terminate teachers for teaching state standard content." The counsel said, "The board relied on staff recommendations." Dr. Webb said, "Which staff?" The counsel said, "The curriculum director and," a pause, "and the board chair." The room got very quiet. I had not planned to say anything beyond my prepared statement. But at the end of the session, Dr. Webb asked if I wanted to add anything. I thought about my father's voice on the phone. "I think this feels unfair." I thought about the 11 drafts of my statement and how none of them had said what I actually wanted to say. I thought about room 214 and the stack of essays I never graded, still sitting in a bag in my closet at home. I stood up. I said, "I taught at Hargrove for 6 years because I believed the school's stated mission, which is to prepare students for academic excellence and a lifetime of critical thinking. I taught mitosis and natural selection and the scientific method because those are not political positions. They are the foundations of science literacy." When I was told that teaching those things was a violation of professional standards, I asked questions, because that is what I would tell any of my students to do when something doesn't add up. I stopped. I took a breath. Then I said, "I also need to say something I didn't put in my written statement. My father was on the board that voted to terminate me. I am not saying that to ask for sympathy. I am saying it because I want this panel to understand what it costs a person to be told by someone who should know her, who has known her whole life, that her professional judgment doesn't matter." I kept working anyway. I kept documenting. I kept trying to do things right. I need someone in a position of authority to tell me that was worth something. I sat down. Dr. Webb looked at me for a moment. Then she made a note. The panel's findings came back 4 weeks later in a 22-page report. They found that Hargrove's termination of my contract was procedurally improper and substantively without merit under the accreditation standards the school had voluntarily adopted. They found that the Clarity Education Partners contract contained provisions that were materially inconsistent with those standards and had not been disclosed as required. They found that the pattern of teacher departures in the affected departments raises substantial concern about whether academic freedom was being systemically suppressed in service of a vendor relationship. The accreditation committee placed Hargrove on formal probation and required a full curriculum audit. Gerald Hargrove III resigned from the board chair position the week the report was published. Mr. Kavanaugh filed a wrongful termination suit on my behalf, and 2 weeks later, Hargrove's attorneys contacted us about a settlement. I won't say the exact number. I'll say it covered my lost salary for the contract period, my legal fees, and a portion of what Mr. Kavanaugh called consequential damages. It was enough to matter. I got a job offer in April, 8th grade earth science at a public school in Oak Park. Lower salary than Hargrove, noisier hallways, older equipment. The lab has a ceiling tile that leaks when it rains, and we've been waiting 6 months for a new centrifuge. I love it. I go to work every morning and I am so happy to be there I could embarrass myself about it. My father called me the day after the settlement was announced. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood the full picture when he voted. He said he hoped I could forgive him someday. I've listened to that voicemail 7 times. I'm not sure what I'll do with it yet. What I know is this: I kept records when everyone else was rewriting them. I asked questions in rooms where questions weren't wanted. I found one person who was willing to say, "This isn't right," out loud, and that was enough to start something. The system did not rescue me. The system was the problem, but there were people inside the system who still believed the rules meant something, and when I gave them evidence, they used it. That is what I want my students to understand. Not that authority is always corrupt, not that institutions always fail, but that facts are stubborn. Documentation is power, and sometimes the most radical thing you can do is write everything down and refuse to stop until someone reads it. I went back to my classroom last week after school, after the kids had gone home. I sat in my old chair at my old desk and I read through the 31 essays I'd never graded, the ones from the morning everything started. They were about ecological systems. What happens when one part of an interconnected system is removed? What changes? What adapts? What finds a way? I thought about that for a long time. Then I opened my gradebook and I started reading. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say the vote. Or the moment I walked out of that conference room with my folder and my blazer and nowhere to be the next morning. But the hardest part was the 4 seconds of silence on the phone. My father pausing before he said, "I know this feels unfair." 4 seconds isn't long. But it was long enough that I understood he already knew what he was going to do. That's the thing about choices. They don't happen in the moment we think they do. My father's choice was made long before that Thursday evening in December. It was made in every small compromise, every time he told himself the board had good intentions, every time he looked the other way at something that didn't sit right. By the time I was sitting across that table from him, his path was already set. And mine was too, I just didn't know it yet. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't kept those lesson plans. If I hadn't written down every curriculum meeting, every email, every date. I almost didn't. There's a version of me that thought, this is a good school. These are reasonable people. I don't need to document like I'm expecting a fight. That version of me would have lost, not because the truth wasn't on her side, but because truth without evidence is just a story one person tells about themselves. The documentation wasn't paranoia. It was the only thing that made the truth legible to anyone else. Dr. Farrow called me because she believed something wrong had happened. Mr. Kavanagh took my case because I gave him something to work with. Dr. Webb asked the right questions because I had already asked them first and written the answers down. None of that was luck. It was the accumulation of small, unglamorous decisions. Staying late to organize files, resisting the urge to just let it go, choosing to be inconvenient rather than quiet. I used to think integrity meant being honest with other people. I understand now it also means being honest about what you're seeing, even when the system around you is telling you that you're the problem for seeing it. That's harder than it sounds. There's so much pressure when an institution turns against you to start doubting your own perception, to wonder if maybe you were difficult, maybe you missed something, maybe they're right and you just can't see it. I doubted myself plenty, but I kept the records anyway, and the records didn't doubt anything. My father is not a bad man. I genuinely believe that. He is a man who let comfort and obligation pull him in a direction he should have resisted. And when the moment came that required courage, he didn't find it. That has consequences. Not as punishment, just as the natural result of how things work. What you build, you live in. What you protect, you become. He protected the institution, and the institution collapsed anyway, and now he's left with a voicemail his daughter hasn't returned. I'm not saying I'll never call him back. I'm saying I'm not ready yet, and I'd stopped apologizing to myself for that. What I know for certain is this. I went back to teaching because teaching is what I am, not just what I do. I sit in a classroom in Oak Park now with a leaky ceiling and kids who ask the same questions 8th graders have always asked, and I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. I got there by refusing to let someone else's bad decision become the final word on my life. That's not a grand conclusion. It's just what happened.